hours after Andrew and Abby Borden were brutally hacked to death, Fall River found itself trying to make sense of the impossible. 2 murders committed in broad daylight inside a locked house with no weapons, no footprints, and no clear suspect. But as investigators questioned the family and took in the bizarre calmness of Lizzie Borden, something shifted.
Neighbors whispered, detectives hesitated, and journalists descended on the house like vultures. One of the surviving daughters of the house stopped being a victim and slowly became the center of everybody's raised eyebrows in town.
I'm Jimbo.
And I'm Dustin. And this is Dark Discoveries.
Welcome back to Dark Discoveries. Today we move from the murder themselves, the brutality, the confusion, the impossibility of what happened inside that small, tense home, into the immediate aftermath. This is the period where everything changes for Lizzie Borden. In the hours after the murders, she was simply the surviving daughter of a horrifying tragedy. But within a day, within hours even, suspicion began to settle over her like a fog. Not because police immediately found any evidence against her, because they didn't, and it's not because she confessed, because she didn't do that either. But it was because of her behavior, her shifting statements, and the strange circumstances surrounding her father and stepmother's deaths, which created a portrait of someone who might know more than she was telling. Episode 5 is the turning point in this story. It's where the investigation begins, where the inconsistencies pile up, and where the myth of Lizzie Borden as America's most notorious daughter begins to form. Today, we're going to walk you through the following days that followed the murders, which is a period of confusion, clumsiness by the police to say the least, odd comments by Lizzie, and choices that still baffle historians to this day.
And that's exactly right. This episode is all about that strange in-between space. The murders had happened, but the answers hadn't. The bodies were found, but the motive wasn't clear. People in Fall River were scared, confused, and desperate for an explanation. And into the emotional vacuum stepped Lizzie, one person who should have been devastated, distraught, even hysterical. But instead, her demeanor over the next several days became one of the most discussed aspects of this case. Some said she was calm because she was in shock. Others said that she was calm because she already knew the truth. Some said she behaved oddly because Victorian expectations forced women into artificial composure. Others believe she simply couldn't fake grief conceivingly. Whatever the reason was, her posture, her words, her decisions in those critical early hours shaped everything that came next. Episode 4 was violence. Episode 5 is the suspicion that began to simmer immediately after.
When the police arrived at the Borden home shortly after Andrew's body was discovered, they weren't prepared for what they found. Fall River wasn't a city used to brutal axe murders, especially not ones involving prominent citizens. The officers who responded did so with a mixture of shock and caution. Rather than treating the house like a sealed crime scene, they allowed people to wander inside and outside freely, neighbors, friends, doctors, and even reporters. The Borden sisters were not separated for formal questioning. Evidence was not preserved with care, and worst of all, everyone in the house was treated with a level of politeness that compromised the integrity of the investigation. At this time, Lizzie wasn't considered a suspect. She was a wealthy woman in distress. But the biggest mistake the police made that day was assuming the crime must have been committed by an outsider. They did not immediately test clothing, search for weapons on the premises thoroughly, or isolate Lizzie's movements. All of these oversights created cracks in the investigation that would later become enormous gaps. The early hours of any homicide investigations are critical, and the Fall River police allowed those hours to slip away.
And the lack of urgency becomes even more glaring when you consider just how strange the situation was. Two brutal murders inside a locked house. No one in town heard or saw anything suspicious. Yet, because the Bordens were a respected family, the assumption leaned away from internal conflict. That meant the officers didn't challenge Lizzie's early explanations. They didn't press her on her timelines. They didn't even examine her clothing with suspicion. They barely glanced at the stove, the wash bin, or her bedroom. In fact, one of the officers later admitted he didn't want to search her room too thoroughly because she might have been changing her clothes. Victorian sensibilities literally shielded potentially critical evidence. That early softness is what allowed inconsistencies to take root, inconsistencies that became far more suspicious in the days that followed. The investigation was flawed from the moment it started, and those flaws echoed across everything we examined in this case.
So, Dustin, do you think that this case could have been solved if the police would have been thorough with their investigations right here from the start?
It's definitely going to, it's like first 48, you know what I mean?
Right.
I'm sure even back then, when you have time to clean up your crime scene, you have time to get rid of the weapon, you can burn clothes, you have all that extra time. You can do about anything. And when you're in a time where you're not going to have physical DNA evidence, much more than a fingerprint, what you're going to have, it's all going to be probably based off of if there's a murder weapon, if you find, bloody clothing, everything else is going to be circumstantial, and you're going to build your case around that. So
right, but like right here, this officer did not want to go into Lizzie's room because she might have been changing. That's probably what the murderer would have had to do to get out of all these bloody clothes, right? Or even hide the murder weapon.
Oh, they weren't bloody clothes that she burnt. They were
painted. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Painted with what, I ask? Blood or paint?
Red paint, right?
And then you have time to, as we go, certain things are going to be manipulated evidence-wise by whoever did it to throw you off the lead. So, it definitely would have answered some questions a little bit sooner.
So one of the most hotly debated aspects of this case is Lizzie's demeanor immediately after the murders. According to multiple witnesses, she was calm, eerily calm. She was not crying, not hysterically, and not shocked in a way people expected. Instead, she answered questions politely. She made suggestions to officers investigating the house. She offered explanations about Abby's whereabouts without prompting, and she focused immediately on the idea of an intruder, despite the absence of evidence supporting that theory. Several witnesses noted that Lizzie repeatedly mentioned someone might have come into the house earlier or that someone with a grudge against Andrew might have murdered him. The tone wasn't frantic, it was matter of fact. For some, this was simply shock. For others, it was strategic. Lizzie shaping the narrative from the very beginning. Her composure wasn't just surprising, it became one of the earliest red flags for investigators.
It just wasn't her calmness, it was the contradictions that she said. Within the first couple of hours, Lizzie gave multiple versions of her whereabouts. She said she was first in the barn, then she said she was eating pears, then she said she heard a noise, then she said she didn't hear anything at all. She said she'd been ironing handkerchiefs then she said she wasn't. These inconsistencies weren't huge lies. They were small, subtle shifts that made her seem unreliable. People under trauma can be inconsistent, of course, but combined with the oddly measured demeanor, the inconsistencies became very suspicious. And then there was the strange fact that Lizzie expressed no concern at all for Abby. Even after Andrew was killed, even after the people searched the house, Lizzie never once urged anyone to take a look at her stepmother. She simply repeated that Abby must have gone out. When you add that with the fact that Abby had already been dead for hours, some see it as guilt, others see it as detachment, but no one sees it as normal.
But let's not forget, she also said that there was a note left, remember?
Yeah, the note that nobody could find.
That turned out not to be true at all. So let's look at the first investigation, or the interrogation, if you will, of Lizzie. So they're going to start building their case against her. So the following day, Friday, August 5th, police returned to ask more formal questions. This is the interrogation where Lizzie's answers began to raise serious suspicion. She couldn't give a consistent timeline of her movements. She repeated the idea of a note that called Abby away, but no note ever existed. She mentioned hearing scraping or distressing sounds at odd times. And most puzzingly, she insisted she was in the barn for a long stretch of time, despite the barn loft being stifling hot and filled with dust so thick that the officers later found no footprints in the dust near where she claimed to have stood. This was also the interrogation where she mentions her father had enemies, even though Andrew was widely regarded as a peaceful, predictable man who rarely quarreled with others. Her statements felt like she was trying to create a narrative around unknown assailants, and police began to suspect she was improvising.
And the problem for Lizzie was that every answer she offered opened up new questions instead of closing old ones. The inconsistency started to look less like shock and more like evasion. The barn alibi didn't hold up. The non-existent note became a glaring red flag. And then there were the odd gaps, moments she would simply or wouldn't explain. Investigators were now seeing her responses through a lens of suspicion. And one police officer started to question the suspect's credibility. Everything she says becomes evidence against them. Lizzie wasn't hysterical. She wasn't unhinged, but she wasn't reliable. And in this situation where the timeline is tight and only a few people could have committed this murder or these murders, unreliability becomes evidence. The police didn't have a murder weapon. They didn't even have a confession. They didn't even have blood-soaked clothes or any type of evidence that way. But they now had something else, a suspect who who seemed to be telling a fractured story.
I'm going to say this right here, right now. It's not looking good for our girl Lizzie right here. I mean, they've caught her in a lie about the note. They've caught her in a lie basically about being in the barn because if it's covered with dust and everything where she said she was standing, I mean, you would still leave footprints there. Not only that, but the clothes she was wearing would have been dirty and dusty from being up in that loft. If it was hot outside, she would have been sweating. And she probably would have looked like disheveled. And you know how it is on a hot summer day. You're just oozing with sweat.
Yeah, you kind of smell a little bit funky. And like I said, it's not, you're going to look disheveled. But here's what I don't get is if Lizzie did commit this murder, you have to know that at some point she thought about this. You just don't up and do it. You're going to lay it out. You're going to think it out. You're going to plan it. You know the movements of both of your stepmother and your father. You know what time he goes to work. You know what time he comes home. You know what time she goes and does certain things. So you know the days of the week or the times that the maid or servants that are going to be doing their job in other places. So you would think that it would have been so thought out, you could just regurgitate a whole story once and just go off of that the whole time versus here's a second, there's a second. So did it happen to where it just was a not a well thought out plan? It just kind of was a crime of emotion.
Well, you got to think who else was there that morning at their house and left? Her uncle. Her uncle was there. So, and her father just had like it wasn't even going to work. It was like just meeting somebody, right? He was gone for a little bit. So even if you would have known, hey, my father's usually gone for, maybe she thought he was going to be gone all day. Huh?
You'd have had things planned out to where even if you had less time, you could carry out what you needed to carry out. But the biggest thing is you would just think that the story, you would have had everything laid out in your head to where I'm going to practice this. I'm going to regurgitate everything so I have all my bases covered.
Right. Especially if let's say there was 2 murders. What do? You guys have to get together and have the same story. You can't have contradicting evidence when somebody says one thing and your sister says another thing, let's say. You definitely don't want to have it where you're saying 2 different stories or 3 different stories, right?
Here we are, I've been with my wife for 20 years and it's like we're on vacation and they're playing like, the newlywed game. And it's like, let's practice these answers because I love my wife to death, but you just never know what she's going to say. Like she could know the answer and say something different, but it's like, let's set this out and have all these answers figured out in our head. So when they ask it, we can just regurgitate it and win this thing. But
never works, does it?
When you don't plan it out, that's when things don't match up. And makes you wonder, you have a timeline. Did maybe the uncle leave and come back? And then, if I take out if I take out Abby, I can take her out. Well, the next living kin would be the daughters, maybe even him. Like, is there a will that I can forge to do it? So, there's still.
Well, because he was there talking about wills and inheritances and all that, remember?
But the only 3 people who know that conversation happened are Lizzie and her sister and her uncle. That's the only 3 people that knew that conversation happened.
Maybe the maid. Maybe if she was
the maid,
around.
but she was outside cleaning and doing something.
But she was doing the inside and outside windows, though, so she could have been inside.
Supposed to be privy to it, but maybe a 4th person. So you would think that, that would maybe come to light if that was one of the things that happened.
So let's talk about that mysterious dress and the Sunday morning fire. So now we come to one of the most suspicious moments in the entire early investigation, the burning of the dress. 2 days after the murders, on a Sunday morning, Lizzie was seen by her friend Alice Russell in the kitchen holding a dress covered in paint or stains. Lizzie announced she was going to burn it because it was, quote, ruined. And then calmly and deliberately, she fed the dress into the fire in the kitchen stove. This evidence was later reported to the police by Alice Russell, and it became a central piece of circumstantial evidence. Was the dress actually stained with paint? Or maybe with blood? Did Lizzie dispose of the only physical evidence linking her to the murders? There was no way to know because the dress was gone forever. The timing was suspicious. The explanation was thin. And the quietness with which she performed the act only heightened the sense that she was removing something incriminating against her.
And then this is one of the details that honestly makes you, even if you're the most staunchest Lizzie is innocent supporter, if you're the prime suspect in a double murder, why burn clothing in the middle of the investigation? The only thing that would make it more suspicious, in my opinion, is if you did it at night. Even if it truly was stained with paint, the optics were terrible. Paint or not, the dress was destroyed before anybody could examine it. Police hadn't cataloged all the clothing Lizzie owned, so they couldn't confirm whether it was the burned dress matched what she was wearing that morning. The timing was almost unbelievably suspicious. It didn't just add fuel to the fire. It practically exploded suspicion into certainty for many investigators. It's one of the reasons Lizzie was arrested only days later. Whether the dress was innocent or damning, the act of burning it became the most symbolic gesture in the case. It made Lizzie look like someone with something to hide.
Now, Dustin, I don't know about you, but have you ever ruined a shirt or something? Let's say you got grass stains on it, or you've even been painting and you get paint on a shirt. Have you ever burned or thrown something away like that? Or do you say, hey, if I'm going to cut the grass or I'm going to paint again, I'm going to keep this so I can use this same clothing over and over again for these type of jobs I'm going to do?
So I got yelled at for a long time that all my clothes were garage clothes, and I had to stop wearing whatever I was wearing that was nice into the garage to go work on the race car and different things. She's like, all your clothes are garage clothes. You need to keep some stuff that doesn't get stained and greasy. So absolutely, I don't throw it away. Everything I own becomes work clothes.
Right.
All I do is work, so it doesn't matter.
Right. So, but you got to remember her family's pretty wealthy. So is it looked down upon in their society if you wore something that wasn't pristine outside to do your chores or something?
Yeah, it's crazy to think that you have to have a decent, even your chore clothes were probably nicer than most people's church clothes.
Right. And if it was paint, did we ever find out what they were painting?
Exactly. What was she painting?
Exactly.
Why was it
I'm
red?
asking you.
Why is it red?
That's one of the biggest mysteries I think I would like to know is what was the paint from? And did they find like the paint can, like the fence post? Was it red? Was it white, blue?
Oh, you can always go paint the barn,
Right. But then again, there would have been some little bit of evidence out there about that, right? There would have been feet prints.
Fresh, clean paint.
Yeah.
Well, see, I wonder though too, is if you can, if you're in the bar and they're looking for footprints, is it hard to go and kind of kick up some dust in another area to get it to try to settle? You know, if it's hard ground. So the thing is it's not like it's concrete floor with dust on.
Or can you
it's
take
a
can you take a broom and do a quick sweep like in the walkway to cover up the tracks to say where you were?
Because it's going to be, there's not going to be grass because it's a barn. So it's going to be hard packed dirt. You're going to have some dust, but if it's not wet, it's not going to really leave I wouldn't think a lot of evidence behind that you were there.
Right. But I'm saying she doesn't want the evidence gone that she was there because that helps prove she was there when she said she was there.
That's her alibi.
Right. So Lizzie was summoned to the inquest on August 8th. This was the moment where her statements became part of the public record and where her credibility suffered a major blow. Unbeknownst to many early investigators, Lizzie had been given morphine by the family doctor to help her sleep. Morphine affects cognitive clarity, memory, and emotional stability, but the court allowed her to testify anyway. Hey, why don't you come testify for yourself? Are you on drugs? Sure. Okay. So what followed was a series of confused answers, contradictions, inconsistencies, and vague explanations that made her look evasive and unreliable. She contradicted herself about where she was, what she had heard, what she did, and how she felt. She corrected earlier statements. She offered some new details. She took back other details. The inquest testimony became a foundational reason the judge later ordered for her arrest.
And in many ways, the inquest sealed her fate, not because she had confessed, but because she seemed unable to keep her story straight. She gave multiple versions of nearly everything. Where she was when Abby died, whether she heard her in distress, whether she had a good standing relationship with Abby, whether she thought her father had enemies, morphine or not, her testimony was damning. Her demeanor didn't help either. She seemed to be too composed, too controlled, too concerned with precision, yet slipping constantly into contradiction. And you would think that you're a little bit more loose-lipped under morphine, a little bit loopy. So to be composed that well doesn't seem to quite add up, in my opinion.
You would think if she was definitely that case, then you wouldn't, if you're her defense lawyer, you wouldn't put her up there on these questions without him being present. Be like, look, she cannot do this right now. She's drugged up, right?
Yeah. We have her sedate, like she's still walking and talking, but she's sedated to deal with the trauma. But, was that just a way for her to try to, hey, can you give me some morphine? I'm having some problem here, to try to cover up herself. So this is when the public really begins whispering. The press began circling, and the police, who had been hesitant at first, now felt they had enough cause to move forward. Lizzie wasn't arrested because of her physical evidence. She was arrested because someone saw her do it. She wasn't arrested because somebody saw her do it. My bad. She was arrested because of her story, her behavior. This made her look guilty as hell. And once the machinery of early American justice began turning, there was absolutely no stopping it.
Unbelievable, dude. She's not looking good at this point. She's like, what would you say? Public enemy number one in this murder charge.
She's tried to leave some like red herrings out there to try to like draw you off of her, but all that's done is just kind of had you circle back to her.
Do you think it's her doing that on purpose?
I don't know why you'd want to have any heat come towards you. You'd want to drive them away from yourself as much as possible.
Maybe it was just the medication that was making her all jacked up and telling different things and contradicting herself.
But, we've talked about this time and time again. And I know there's books about this whole trial. I mean, this was another one of the cliche trial of the centuries.
This and O.J. Simpson, right?
So you have a lot of eyewitness evidences in court. So I don't think you can really say that it got changed. The story got changed with time. There was enough people in the courtroom, enough people with interest with a pen that was writing down everything that was said, taking notes on body language. I can't remember who it was. There was another really big trial of the century right before this, and I'm spacing who it was, but it's not uncommon at this time.
Right. So Lizzie Borden was arrested on August 11th, 1892. Her arrest shocked the town of Fall River. Many believed she was incapable of such violence. Others thought she was precisely the type of person who could commit murder behind a mask of gentility. She was taken to the Taunton jail, not a harsh environment, but still a jarring shift for a woman of her social standing. She received special accommodations, private quarters, nicer furnishings, but she was still a prisoner, and the community was deeply divided. Some residents believed in her innocence wholeheartedly and saw the unrest as an affront to morality. Others began whispering about the family tensions, of course, the burned dress, the odd statements she had made, and of course, her eerie composure. The press descended quickly, turning the case into one of the earliest national media frenzies. Suddenly, Lizzie wasn't just a suspect. She was a scandal, a headline, and a public obsession.
Who doesn't like a good old juicy story? As the newspaper sensationalized every moment, Lizzie's persona transformed from a quiet church-going woman to an enigmatic. I think that's how you're supposed to say it. I can say it in my head, but I'm just not wanting to say the words. A polarizing murder suspect. The media painted her as either a misunderstood victim of circumstance or a cunning killer hiding behind Victorian propriety. Neither portrait was entirely accurate because this both fueled public fascination. And while Lizzie sat in jail awaiting trial, her defense team, one of the most formidable in Massachusetts, began preparing for battle that would define the American legal history. The prosecution, meanwhile, believed they had built a strong enough case of circumstantial evidence. They had motive, opportunity, inconsistent statements, and a burned dress. What they didn't have was a murder weapon, blood evidence, or a confession. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic trials of the 19th century. And in episode 6, that's exactly where we're headed.
So today we've covered the days after the murders, the confusion, the suspicion, the inconsistent statements, the burned dress, and the inquest that pushed Lizzie into the spotlight as the prime suspect. The investigation may have been flawed, but the narrative forming around Lizzie was powerful, compelling, and shaped heavily by her own behaviors and the emotional context of the home. She was no longer simply a survivor of a horrific crime. She was the center of it.
In our next episode, episode 6, we'll walk you through the trial itself. The witnesses, the defense strategy, the prosecution's case, the courtroom drama, and the shocking twist. Along with the verdict that left America stunned. The Lizzie Borden trial wasn't just a legal battle. It was a theater, a media spectacle, and a cultural moment all wrapped together. And it changed the way Americans saw crime, wealth, and women in the justice system. Episode 6 is the heart of the courtroom storm. And trust us, you won't want to miss it. And as always, I need to remember one thing. The deeper you dive,
The darker it gets.